targeted.
From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
The UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, eh? That's a fat t-shirt seller based in Coventry, in the Midlands in England. A man who's in exile because he was in prison a couple of times in Syria. He's nobody you could believe now. Rami Abdul Rahman is his name or something like that. We tell you the truth. This is the Richie Allen Show, by the way. How you doing? Are you well? It's Monday.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show.
The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights in Coventry. Buy a t-shirt from me and I'll tell you some lies. How you doing? Monday.
It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Do you remember Vera Twomey on this programme? Do you remember Vera? What an amazing woman she is. She'll be live on the line from Agabalog in County Cork. Vera is the woman who fought tooth and nail to get the THC oil needed for her daughter Ava, who's got a very rare form of epilepsy. A remarkable Irish woman, and she's recently published her book For Ava, which is all about that story. Medicinal cannabis, THC oil. This is a huge story in the present climate, and I'm delighted that Vera returns to the programme. She'll join me a little bit later on this hour. And one of the founders of UKIP, a emeritus professor at the London School of Economics, Professor Alan Sked, who's been on the programme before, will be on to talk about the Brexit shit show. Let's call it what it is. Alan Sked joins the programme in the second hour. This is Europe's most listened to independent radio show. It is, and it's presented by me, Richie Allen, live right now on Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv, TuneIn Radio, and multiple other platforms as well. Alrighty, yeah, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. If you fertilised that one, if you dried it out, I should say, you'd fertilise Ireland with it. Very autumnal day today. I wonder if the weather will pick up when the youngsters go back to school. It often happens. God has a wicked sense of humour. Let's go straight into the top story of the day. Boris Johnson, as you might have heard on the news there, is considering seeking an early general election if the MPs who want to block a no-deal Brexit defeat the government this week. Now, Sky News and the BBC both are reporting that discussions are going on right now at 10 Downing Street about asking Parliament to approve a snap poll. Johnson cannot just call an election because of the Fixed Terms Parliament Act. Yes. So BBC's political editor Laura Koonsberg said it could happen as soon as Wednesday, but no final decision has been taken as of yet. Tory ex-ministers are joining forces with Labour. You see, this is the problem for Boris Johnson. Rebel Tory MPs are joining with opposition parties to figure out how to block a no deal to ensure that we don't leave on Halloween without a deal. So hence all the election talk. This has been my prediction all along. I've said this for a long, long time now. The thwarting of Brexit by opposition parties and by rebel Tory MPs. Rebel Tory MPs, I think they had a hit in 1980, didn't they? With Funky Cole Medina or something like that. Rebel Tory MPs would join the opposition parties and would lay waste to the Tory party and force a general election. I've been saying it for a long time. It has been a mad day. It'll get more and more chaotic tomorrow and Wednesday. So Johnson is telling Tory MPs right now that if Remain supporting MPs take control of the House agenda tomorrow, if they do that, they'll try and arrange a vote. What'll happen is, if Remain supporting MPs take control of the House business, which is kind of unprecedented, they will then try to arrange a vote on a further extension to Article 50, meaning we wouldn't leave on Halloween as we're supposed to, even though we never were going to anyway. Johnson is telling his MPs, if we lose control of the House tomorrow, let's go for an election. Here's Sky News editor-at-large, guy called Adam Bolton.
It appears that Mr Johnson is going to try and dare them into holding a general election. Problem with that is he needs 2/3 of Parliament to vote for it, and If he sacks all the 20, 30 MPs who are going to vote against him, then there's no reason for them to support his plans. And the Labour opposition and the other opposition parties are indeed divided. They don't want an election right now, and if they're not prepared to vote for it in significant numbers, the Fixed Term Parliament Act means that Mr Johnson could be stuck, and indeed he could be stuck quite possibly squatting in Downing Street with Jeremy Corbyn and the opposition claiming that they can put together a government. So it really is a most spectacular meltdown of British constitutional procedure, really.
Yeah, Adam Bolton has never seen anything like it in his life. They've all been saying that today. Never seen anything like it. Incredibly unusual. Adam Bolton. Here's Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is the Labour Party leader, of course, and he was in Salford today, just around the corner from me. And of course, if he was in Salford, he was there with Rebecca Long Bailey. She was with him. Here's Jeremy calling for an election.
We must come together to stop no deal. This week could be our last chance. We are working with other parties to do everything necessary to pull our country back from the brink. Then we need a general election. When a government finds itself without a majority, the solution is not to undermine democracy. The solution is to let the people decide and call a general election. It is the people, not an unelected Prime Minister, who should determine our country's future.
Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn is excitable as ever. This is a bit of fun. SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon, who's a staunch Remainer, and of course she's hoping to secure another Scottish independence referendum out of the Brexit detritus. That's what the SNPs want, this calamitous mess. They hope out of it because most people, well not most people, but the majority of people in Scotland voted to remain. So Nicola Sturgeon locked horns this morning with ITV's Piers Morgan. Sturgeon spun a fairy tale as to why we are in this shit now, but Piers Morgan wasn't having any of it at all. Here we go.
The reason that the House of Commons can't come together and agree a way forward is that there was no consensus before the vote what Brexit actually meant in practice. And nobody was prepared to be honest.
That is not the reason. The real reason why Parliament has not agreed any deal for Brexit is that 3/4 of Parliament actually voted to remain. They don't want Brexit to happen. So when they bang on about democracy and prorogation and so on, the absolute truth of this is that Parliament, for 3 years, in my opinion, has systematically done everything in its power to prevent the will of the people and the way they voted in the majority in that referendum from happening. And I say that as someone who voted Remain and still would vote Remain again tomorrow. Well, you may laugh, but 17.4 million people, I believe,
I'm laughing because I can't get a word in edgeways.
They have every right to feel betrayed
You'll
by
stop
Parliament.
laughing about that soon.
Well, they have every right to feel betrayed by Parliament.
With the greatest of respect, Piers, and I hesitate to say this because I'm sure I'll pay a price for it, but I think you're wrong. And let me say that from somebody who also voted Remain in a country that heavily voted Remain. After the vote, I put forward to Theresa May at the time a compromise proposal. OK, let's have the UK leave the EU, but let's stay in the single market and the customs union. Nobody really contemplated during that referendum being dragged out of the single market and the customs union. So that was possible compromise grounds that Remainers and Leavers could have come together on. And yet that was completely...
I'm not letting you get away with that. It is complete nonsense. The Prime Minister of this country, the week before the referendum, David Cameron made it crystal clear as the Prime Minister, a week before the referendum, be under no illusion. He said, this is a once-in-a-lifetime vote. There won't be another one, and it will mean coming out of the single market. He couldn't have made it any clearer.
He couldn't have made it any clearer is right. I remember it well. I remember watching it well. I'll never forget it. Do you want to hear some of it? Here we go.
I think one of the most important moments in this campaign was when the
Out campaign said they wanted to leave the single market. And what the British public would be voting for, hang on, let me just finish. The British public would be voting, if we leave, would be to leave the EU and leave the single market.
Because if we're not in the single market, it is harder for companies to export.
We'd be
That was Nicola Sturgeon herself, wasn't it?
out of the single market.
This is all pre-referendum now.
That's the reality. Britain would be quitting.
That's the pigeon fancier George Osborne.
Quitting the single market.
If we were outside the single market and we had a deal like, say, America does, which is what the head of the Leave campaign has recommended.
If we were to complete the single market in services, which is what the Brexit camp wants to walk away from.
That was Nick Clegg.
We vote to come out of the biggest
This is Davidson, Ruth Davidson, former Scottish Conservative leader.
free trade bloc anywhere in the world. There will be tariffs put on British businesses.
And pulling out of the single market, which is what the Leave campaign want to do.
A vote to remain would mean businesses retain access to the world's biggest single market, 500 million people instead of 65 million people in the UK.
Now, if we were to come out of the
This is Chucker O'Munner.
European Union single market and trade along the lines suggested by Vote Leave and Boris Johnson, those things would be...
And that was before the referendum. You get the picture. Fairly straightforward. Everybody said before the referendum that if we leave the European Union, we'll be leaving the single market and the customs union. This was kind of extraordinary. Do you want to hear a bit of this? Jacob Rees-Mogg, terminological inexactitude darling, was on LBC this morning, and it was extraordinary radio, not through any brilliance by LBC, which is garbage, but just by chance. A guy called Dr. David Nicholl wrote the medical section of the Operation Yellowhammer report into what sort of effect a no-deal Brexit would have on the National Health Service. So this Dr. David Nicholl wrote a fear-mongering section of Operation Yellowhammer, warning about doom and gloom if we do leave with no deal. So Jacob Rees-Mogg was on Nick Ferrari's show, and Mogg was answering questions from the public. And this guy decided to surprise Mogg by ringing in. Mogg wasted no time in telling him what he thought of his fear-mongering. This is interesting. You'll hear the doctor first.
My question to you, really, having been involved in writing plans of mitigation and having whistleblown because I felt they were unsafe, is what level of mortality rate are you willing to accept in the light of a no-deal Brexit?
Well, I don't think that there's any reason to suppose that a no-deal Brexit should lead to a mortality rate. I think this is the worst excess of Project Fear, and I'm surprised that a doctor in your position would be fear-mongering in this way on public radio.
Can I remind you, I wrote the plans of mitigation.
In mitigation? Well, you didn't write very good plans if you hadn't worked out how to mitigate, had you? It's fortunate they're being written by other people now who are serious about mitigating rather than Ramona's.
Well, except to stop you there, in the Sunday Times yesterday, the Royal Colleges who were involved in contact with the Department of Health have not yet been approached to update these documents.
Let me just get involved for a moment.
That's incorrect.
Doctor, and obviously I take you on face value because I have no... You say you're a doctor and I have to take that value. Just to remind my listeners, Operation Yellowhammer is the plan that's implemented in the event of a no-deal Brexit. How many people do you think, then? What is the mortality rate that you're working towards and why?
We don't know that. That's not part of Yellowhammer. And I remind you that Michael Gove said that this was the worst-case scenario. That's incorrect. Yellowhammer is not the worst-case scenario.
Sorry, pardon me, but as a gentleman, why are people going to die?
Because of all sorts of problems in terms of the issues of access to drugs, the issue about radioisotopes that have already been highlighted. When you get people at the Royal College saying they're very worried...
But again, as a journalist, I have to say, we've heard the Health Secretary, we've even heard the Chairman of the British Pharmaceutical Association saying, if needs be, and this is extraordinary, they will fly drugs in. You seem to be ignoring Jacob Rees-Mogg.
That's right, that's correct. That there are reserve plans to fly drugs in if necessary. That this is a major focus of government policy. I think it's deeply irresponsible, Dr. Nicholl, of you to call in and try and spread fear across the country. I think it's typical of Remainer campaigners, and you should be quite ashamed, I'm afraid.
I must allow you a quick response.
Which is why I contacted the GMC. Right. So I'm quite happy if you want to refer me to the GMC, we can talk about it there.
He basically said, if you have got a problem with me as a doctor and my predictions, go to the General Medical Council and report me, he said to Rees-Mogg. How interesting. In other news, it's coming up for 18 minutes past the hour. Vera Twomey joins me in about 10 minutes' time. Can't wait for Vera. And Alan Sked, London School of Economics Emeritus Professor, joins me in the second hour to talk about this fear-mongering And I'll put some questions to him, and I will play the devil's advocate. I will play the Remainer. As best as I can, anyway. In other news, the Ku Klux Klan have had their PayPal account suspended. Well, a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan has had a PayPal account suspended. Suspended, not deleted permanently, but suspended. The Ku Klux Klan is there's only one way to put it. It's a vile and wretched racist organisation, isn't it? It always has been. And its past is, it's horrific. Some of the things it's done and taken part in over the years. It still exists. It's never been proscribed in the United States. As far as I know, if I'm wrong, please correct me. I don't think it's illegal to be a member of the Klan. As far as I understand, maybe under the First Amendment, maybe. It's not illegal. Maybe because it's protected by the First Amendment. I'm not sure. But they've had a PayPal account suspended, and this is because it was flagged by an anti-bigotry campaigner. They were going along nicely, getting donations for God knows what, bed sheets presumably, and crosses to burn, I have no idea. But they were getting their donations until some anti-bigotry campaigner complained to PayPal, and PayPal pulled the plug on the account. So there you are. PayPal has been under pressure to root out these accounts and to delete them all or suspend them all. Very interesting this, isn't it? It's an interesting legal issue, that. I don't know, because they're not illegal, the Klan. Is it fair? I know. I'm not taking the side of the Ku Klux Klan, but it's an interesting one, isn't it, here? PayPal said, of course, we do not allow PayPal services to be used to promote hate, violence, or other forms of intolerance that are discriminatory. Interesting one, that. Yeah, we might follow that up. Shall we try and get a member of the KKK on the Richie Allen Show for the crack? Let's do it. Not for the crack, not for the senseless crack, but just to find out what are they doing. What are they doing today, the Klan? Gun control is a big issue. There was another shooting in Texas over the weekend. 7 people killed, 24 injured. The gunman is dead. Handy. Rabid debate on US television. This guy, Beto O'Rourke, Senator, Democratic Senator Beto O'Rourke. He wants to be president, does Beto O'Rourke. And he's using the gun control issue. He's taken it on board. And it's one of his main issues. It's one of his key issues. Beto O'Rourke, or Beto O'Rourke. He was on CNN last night and he was talking about weapons of war. And people should not have weapons of war, AK-47s. People shouldn't have those. Here's Beto O'Rourke on CNN.
The rhetoric that we've used, the thoughts and prayers that you just referred to, it has done nothing to stop the epidemic of gun violence, to protect our kids, our families, our fellow Americans in public places. At a Walmart in El Paso where 22 were killed, in Sutherland Springs in a church, 1 or 2 a day all over this country, 100 killed daily in the United States of America. We're averaging about 300 mass shootings a year. No other country comes close. So yes, this is f***ed up. And if we don't call it out for what it is, if we're not able to speak clearly, if we're not able to act decisively, then we will continue to have this kind of bloodshed in America. And I cannot accept that. And so we're going to speak as defiantly and as strongly as we can, but we're also going to take action.
Don't kill me now. Don't kill me. But didn't Michael Moore make an excellent point in the film Bowling for Columbine, didn't he? I know you hate Michael Moore. I don't hate him. I know you do, though. You tell me every time I mention the man. But in Bowling for Columbine, he drew an analogy between people going out and shooting people in anger, domestically, and the hundreds of thousands of people a year, or maybe even millions a year, whom are murdered by weapons that were sold by the United States of America and her allies to terrorist groups and anybody who will buy them. It's interesting to hear O'Rourke talk about there are 300 mass shootings a year in the United States. Yes, but your military is directly or indirectly involved in an ongoing genocide that began around the time of the Cold War, around the time of the Second World War, right? And then went into Central America. Well, it went into Southeast Asia before that, and then into it went to Korea before that. Of course, Southeast Asia, Central America, we could go on, Iran, the Iraq War, all of it. Your country is involved in murdering millions of people a year. What are you talking about? That was Beto O'Rourke. So what does he want to do? What sort of action does he want to take to end the gun violence.
Red flag laws, and into the sales of weapons of war, and buying those AK-47s and AR-15s back so that they cannot be used against our fellow Americans.
So let's talk more about some of those solutions. You made an unusual campaign stop a couple of weeks ago. You went to the red state of Arkansas, and you went to a gun show. What did you learn there?
The first person who approached me introduced himself, recognized me, and I said, look, I got to be honest, I'm here because we lose more than 40,000 Americans a year. We've got to find a solution. And he said, I shouldn't be here. If you have a pulse, if you're 18 years old, I sell you the gun. I shouldn't be able to do that. He, at a gun show selling guns, was advocating for universal background checks. Another father of three says, I own an AR-15. I'm not sure if I agree with your policy on weapons of war, but I've got 3 kids in school and I'm worried about them. And they're afraid to go to school on Monday. We got to do something. Another guy said, I voted for Trump, have an AK-47, but I'd be willing to give it up if it means that we're going to save lives in this country. The challenge is so grave. The threat is so great. We can't meet it with half measure or only half the country. We've got to bring in Republicans, gun owners, Democrats, non-gun owners alike into these solutions and save lives, or else be complicit in the continuing carnage that we see throughout America. And I will not be part of that. We're going to be part of the solution.
Yeah, but mandatory repossession of guns owned by people who've never broken the law is not a good thing, right? So even if you have one of these assault weapons, but you're a law-abiding citizen, you've never broken the law, it's a bit unfair if the government comes along and says, we are going to mandate that you must give us that assault weapon even though you've never committed any crime. That's maybe not a good thing. And the host puts it to him quite well.
So one of the parts of your solution includes mandatory buybacks for so-called assault weapons. The USA Today editorial board argued against that. They said that you are playing into the NRA's hands, and here's what was part of that editorial. The legislation would absolutely be doomed if it included a mandatory buyback provision. Anything smacking of confiscation would breathe life and energy into the not from my cold dead hands crowd, endangering law enforcement and likely putting a full stop to any further gun safety measures. What's your response?
You know, more than I worry about the politics or the polling, more than I care about what the NRA has to say on this, I care for my kids and this country and people who live in terror every day. People in El Paso, Mexican Americans who say, I feel like I have a target on my back. I'm afraid to go out in public. Kids who thinking about going to school tomorrow, haven't gone through active shooter drills, already know which bookcase they're going to pull down, which window they're going to jump out of. This is not right, and we should not accept it, and we should be honest with ourselves. Universal background checks will help. Ending the sales of weapons of war will help, but if millions of them remain on the streets, they will still be instruments of terror that terrify and terrorize us and take our lives.
But what about...
I'm not going to accept that.
Oh, he's not going to accept that, but he's quite happy for lorry loads and container ship loads of these weapons to be sold to Saudi Arabia and to other rogue states who then use them to brutalise and terrorise innocent people in other countries. The hypocrisy is rank. It is stifling. It is so hypocritical. And of course, you'll never get a CNN host to put that point to him. You know, you talk about mandating the repossession of guns owned by people who haven't broken the law, but you're happy for Lockheed Martin and other countries, Raytheon and others, to sell machines that can kill thousands of people at a time to scumbags overseas. Mr. O'Rourke, any response to that? She could also bring up the fact that while they want to take these assault weapons, which of course I hate, I've no time for guns of course, but they want to take these assault weapons from people who've bought them at gun shows and who use them, most people, for target practice and stuff like that in their gun clubs. They want to take them from people, but increasingly police officers right across the United States are using these guns as they become hyper-militarized, as posse comitatus is just thrown out the window and the police are turned into Robocops. There's no wonder that people are paranoid in the United States. There's no wonder that gun owners are paranoid even about the intentions of their government. It's mad, I tell you, mad. This is the Richie Allen Show. How you doing? 27 and a half minutes past the hour. My name is Richie Allen, by the way. Monday's programme got a very busy week of shows lined up for you. Broadcasting live out of Salford in Greater Manchester. This is Europe's most listened to independent radio show. Great to be with you. This is the Jackson 5. Jackson 5 on the Richie Allen Show. I want you back. It's 5:30. It's Monday, the 2nd of September 2019. Welcome to the programme. A grim, overcast afternoon in Salford in Greater Manchester. But then again, we'd be lonely without it. You know, when you do programmes like this and when you produce programmes, you do, from time to time, get to meet some pretty amazing people. I mean, you properly do. Not every day, but you get to meet some amazing people. A couple of years ago, we met an extraordinary woman called Vera Twomey. You remember Vera? Amazing. She's gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure that her sick daughter, Ava, who's not so sick these days, thank God, was able to get the medicinal cannabis, the THC oil that she needed to help with her seizures, because she has a very rare form of epilepsy called Dravet Syndrome. Amazing stuff, this. I know you know about this because it made international headlines. Vera's from Agabalog in County Cork, and at one time she was staying in the Netherlands with her daughter and her family so that Ava could be treated there with this medicinal cannabis, because without it she would have died. She was having upwards of 20, 23, 25 seizures in a day. Horrendous stuff. It was feared she would have ended up brain damaged or dead if she didn't have the medicinal cannabis. But of course you couldn't get it in Ireland, and nor could you bring it back into the country. Now the ambulance service in the area were so familiar with Ava's case that they didn't even need to ask for her address when she was gravely ill. It's an extraordinary story. And let's just bring Vera back on. We're here to talk today about her book, which has just been published by Mercier Press. It's called For Ava, and it's the story about Ava and about Vera and her family and how they've dealt with this. I can't recommend you buy this strongly enough. Get onto the good online bookshops, any good online bookshop, and buy For Ava by Vera Twomey. Great lady. Joins us live again from Agabalog. Vera, welcome back to the programme. Conna sa to?
Tá go hanavar tatu.
Freshen. Absolutely brilliant to have you on, Vera. Thanks for doing it. Congratulations on the book. We're going to talk about the book in a minute and the huge success it's having, because I understand it's topping the charts in WH Smith in Ireland and elsewhere. That's wonderful stuff. First of all, how is Ava herself? How is she doing?
Well, Richie, she went back to school the same days that every other child, I suppose, in the country went back to school, and she's attended school every day so far, and she's just, excuse me, I cannot tell you how different it is now to when we would have spoken to you last. It's like night and day in comparison. Excuse me, she is doing tremendously well, and we've just come from a very, very dark place, kind of into the light, if you will, because her life has been saved by the medical cannabis. She's not on any other pharmaceutical medications now. She's only on the CBD and THC oil, and they're maintaining this standard of life that she's achieved now. She's growing, putting on weight, getting more independent. The words are coming. They're coming slowly, but as you said in your introduction about the book and about Ava, so forth, there would have been a lot of damage done over the years with the seizures and so forth. So we have a lot of ground to cover, but she's such a brave little girl and she's doing really, really well.
It's amazing to hear that she's off to school. That's wonderful. Now, tell us about the seizures then. She had these horrendous seizures that were, you described it so graphically, the absolute terror that you were living with when she was having them, not knowing if the next one could do terrible damage or worse, still the ultimate damage, that it might kill her. And the medicine is doing the trick. It's doing well. How often would she have a seizure now?
It would be very infrequent. Our issue now, our only real issue with Ava now is that her immune system has been compromised, and due to medications over a period of time, and also because her diagnosis of Dravet Syndrome, one of the things would one of the things with Dravet is it would include a compromised immunity. So if she picks up a bug, or if she gets a throat infection or a chest infection or anything like that, her temperature can go up quite rapidly, and she is prone to seizures then. But the thing is, she might have one, and I can't. I mean, a seizure is a very frightening experience for anybody. But we were in a position where if Ava had a chest infection previously, she would be hospitalised for maybe a week or 2 weeks. You wouldn't know how long she would be hospitalised for. Now we can bring down her temperature using the Calpol or the Nurofen, continue with her CBD and THC oil, and she will recover herself. It's a remarkable difference.
It's a remarkable difference. That's a wonderful thing. I could have mentioned in the introduction your march to the Dáil as well, of course, the Irish Parliament, and the huge support you had there. The thing is, we're here to talk about the book For Ava, by the way, folks. We've got Vera Twomey on the line, an extraordinary lady. I'm not just saying that, she is. And Ava is an extraordinary young woman as well. And For Ava is available. Get on to good online retailers and buy this book. It's vitally important, this book. It really is. Now, you've still, despite the fact that this has been life-changing for Ava, you've still got to go to the Netherlands to get the medication over there. You can't get it in Ireland as of yet. Tell us about that. Why hasn't that happened?
Oh, well, in Ireland...
Right, we might have a problem with the line there. Let me just drop it out and call Vera back there. The line is a bit dodgy, so I'm just going to disconnect and reconnect. Sometimes makes the difference. Failing that, I'll give her a call the old-fashioned way. Vera Twomey is our guest, live from Agabalog in County Cork, to talk about this extraordinary experience she's had when they realised that her daughter, young Ava, had Dravet Syndrome, a very severe form of epilepsy, and was taking very, very serious narcotics, medication to try and control it, which wasn't doing any good. She was having up to 23, 25 horrendous seizures a day. And Vera went searching herself to try and figure out what else might be available. What might be available to help her. She went looking online. She used search engines and began to learn about THC oil and medicinal cannabis. So I'm trying her the old-fashioned way on the phone now, and we'll see can we get her back on. Hopefully we can. And we might have her. Vera, we have you back. I think we have you back there, Vera. Sorry we lost you momentarily. But you're back. And now she's gone again. What's going on there? She was there for a minute, you know. Are you there, Vera? She's not, so we're going to try it again. I had her on the phone there and she just dropped out. It could be an area thing. Let's see. Can we get her back? Vera, sorry we lost you momentarily there, but I hope we've got a better line this time. I was asking you about having to still go to Holland to get the medicine, not being able to get it in Ireland.
That's right. We still have to go over to Holland every 12 weeks to collect our medication. Which obviously is, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. We've been granted the license for Ava's medication, but we have to travel to the Netherlands to collect it every 12 weeks.
You can't have it posted, Vera. You can't have it shipped over. Why is that? That's annoying.
Well, I can tell you that the reason that we can't have it shipped over is because of the unwillingness of the Irish government to help us, because there are families over in England. I think there might even be a family in Manchester where their Bedrocan medication, the Home Office made arrangements for a distribution company to travel over to the Netherlands to collect the medication for them, bring it back to the United Kingdom and have the medication dispensed from these families' local chemist or hospital pharmacy in the United Kingdom. But the Irish government wouldn't do that for us. So they're leaving us in a situation where we have to travel every 12 weeks to get the medication. Now, I will continue to travel to get Ava's medication, but it just goes to show that...
it's pathetic, Vera. So
it is.
You've got to get on a plane or take a ferry, whichever way you do it, and you get it in the Netherlands, and then you can come back and you can bring it back. It's pathetic that you have to do that. The Irish Health Minister is a guy called Simon Harris. Now, I know you've done some amazing work in the last couple of years lobbying and raising awareness of this issue. What does Simon Harris and his department have to say when you ask that question, why can't I have it delivered over here? What does the Health Minister say about it?
I can tell you exactly. They told me that there's no such entity exists to be able to provide that service in the Republic of Ireland. That is what I was told.
And I understand the current Taoiseach is a former Health Minister, Leo Varadkar, and he wasn't very forthcoming when you were in the middle of the really difficult times with Ava, and he wasn't much use either. Is that right? And I don't want to be bashing these people now, but the truth is the truth.
I don't want to be. I don't want to be bashing people either. But the fact is that they weren't of any. There was a complete lack of empathy, a complete lack of understanding, a complete unwillingness to help a little child who I felt deserved access to this medication like other children in other countries, like in Holland, in Israel, in America, in Canada. These other little children were getting access to medical cannabis and having success with medical cannabis. And it seemed very logical to me that we would present ourselves to our health minister, look for his help, and that we could work together to try and find a solution for our child. But unfortunately, that wasn't what happened. It was the absolute the commitment and the determination of people in Ireland, people in England, people across Europe that came behind, and even as far as America, that came behind Ava's story and helped us to move forward. And I suppose, Richie, that's why I wrote the book. That's part of the reason why I wrote the book, because it's so hard. It is so unbelievably difficult.
You must be knackered, Vera.
Pardon?
You must be knackered, like. I mean, this has been going on now for years, and I was talking about you today, your ears must have been burning, and you're talking about it there being difficult. You must be shattered, like. I mean, you must be knackered mentally. I mean, it's wonderful that Ava's doing so well, but you must be knackered.
Well, you see, the thing is, I mean, I feel so strongly that what's being done to our kids is wrong. It's so wrong. And it's not just our children, it's adults as well. It's other patients that need access to this medication. That, you know, somebody asked me that question actually about being knackered and being worn out. You see, the fact is, and you said it in your introduction about the book, we could have lost Ava. I could be in so much worse situation than what I'm in. I could have lost my little girl, but I didn't lose my little girl because I kept going and we got the medical cannabis. And like, there are mummies like over in England, up in Scotland. There's Karen Gray up in Scotland. There's Hannah Deacon in England. There's Tanine Montgomery. There's Emma. I can't think of Emma's second name. Her child needs the medical cannabis as well. All of these women, they're all fighting for their kids as well. And I feel so passionately that you can't just say, "Oh, I'm sorted now. Good luck, Jack." You know, as they say, you can't do that. Other people need access, and we got access only because of the support of other ordinary people. So I wanted to write the book to try and give people hope, because the story at the beginning is sad. It was our sad reality at the beginning of what we were dealing with. But as you go through the book, there's so much beauty in the way that people stood beside us the whole way through this. People came on board and people stayed on board. They wrote letters, they sent emails, they made phone calls, they attended marches in the freezing cold. They came on the walk to Dublin that we did over 9 days when the government wouldn't help us. And we felt our only option was to put on our shoes and walk out the door and walk up to Dublin to try and highlight Ava's case. And we need to help other people. And I just want, via this book, for other parents that are struggling to know that you can do it too, because we're just ordinary people, but we kept going, and you can get there in the end. And it doesn't matter how many people are standing in front of you, because there was plenty of people standing in front of us, but there was hundreds of people standing shoulder to shoulder with us, that we bypassed every obstacle one by one, and we got what we needed for the child in the end.
We've got Vera Twomey live on the line from Agabalog. I've got to say that. I've said it a million times over the years. Vera's a wonderful lady. This is a very important story. We're talking about For Ava. It was only published a couple of weeks ago. It's the story of Ava and Vera and the family, and coming to terms with initially thinking with the Dravet Syndrome, this horrible form of epilepsy that would have killed Ava, let's be honest about it. And it was Vera's determination to try and find out more about it and maybe what could be done about it. Went down the alternative route, and she began investigating and found that medicinal cannabis has been used successfully. Other people have used it not just to treat seizures and epilepsy, but chronic pain and many other illnesses. And she was determined that Ava was going to get to try this, and encountered so many obstacles, as she so eloquently talked about there, and refused to give in to it. Lived in Holland for a time. We talked one time on this programme when you were in Holland, and the stress of that and the nightmare of it, you would not give up. And it's changed Ava's life, her quality of life. As you said earlier on, I think you said it's like night and day where she is now. Everybody needs to hear this. Go online and buy this story, For Ava. It's vital, because Vera, isn't it a stone cold fact that medicinal cannabis has a dramatic effect on many different types of seizures, but not just seizures, other health problems as well, like chronic pain? It's a fact, right? You've seen this yourself. You're a verifiable expert now with all the research you've done. It bloody well works.
Well, I mean, I may not be classified as a medical expert, but I'm an expert in my own way. I'm an expert in seizures. I'm an expert in what it means to be looking at your child and wondering whether they're going to wake up in the morning or not, dealing with that on a daily basis. And there's fathers and mothers out there at the moment listening to this, and they're going through that at the moment. And tis heartbreaking when the NIC guidelines came out recently regarding medical cannabis over in England. They did not recognise the fact that medical cannabis assists with stopping seizures. They did not acknowledge that medical cannabis assists with chronic pain. They did not acknowledge the whole plant medicinal cannabis products, which are the most wholesome and appropriate medicinal cannabis products to be prescribed to patients. They did not acknowledge anything other than, I believe, one pharmaceutical-based CBD product for the treatment of nausea and vomiting. And that is so wrong. And, you know, I would invite any of the people that are listening to your programme today to come on to our Twitter page and follow me on Twitter, or come on to Facebook and follow us on Facebook, where you can see Ava's story. Because if you do, it may show you or enlighten people to understand that medical cannabis works, and that there are thousands of people over in the United Kingdom that are absolutely just hanging on by their fingernails to get access to this product, both adults and children.
Both adults and children. You can follow, you can follow you. Vera is on Twitter, of course, and her Twitter account is Vera S1. So that's Vera, S for Sierra 1, all one word. So it's at Vera S1. But if you look for Vera Twomey, we've got to teach the Philistines over here how to spell Twomey, Vera. It's Twomey. Twomey. Great Irish name, Vera Twomey. So if you look for Vera, you'll find it. Follow her on Twitter. The book is For Ava. Buy the book. And you've eloquently described there how successful medicinal cannabis has been. You're not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. But we do understand that there's a political thing.
Like to say,
go ahead,
Richie, that I would just like to say as well, very clearly, that excuse me. I mean, I'm not opposed to pharmaceutical medication. If pharmaceutical medication works, and if pharmaceutical medication can treat a patient without significant or dangerous side effects, then that's one thing. But when we were delivered the diagnosis of Dravet syndrome, there's another title attached to Dravet syndrome, which is drug-resistant intractable epilepsy. You know, the clue is in the name there.
Yeah.
It's drug-resistant, but it is not resistant to treatment via medical cannabis. And, you know, the extraordinary thing is that consultants and doctors could prescribe dozens and dozens of different types of pharmaceutical products. At one stage, our daughter was on 15 tablets a day. And while she was on those 15 tablets a day, in the interim, she was still having seizures. She experienced an 8-day coma. She experienced 2 heart attacks from her seizures. These are the things that happened to my little girl. And since Ava has begun initially CBD oil and then subsequently the addition of THC to her medical regime, it was in October of 16 that she began CBD oil. Excuse me. And prior to the October of 16, Ava would have spent between 4 to 4.5 months of every year of her life in hospital. After we commenced the CBD oil in October of 16, Ava has not been admitted to hospital in an emergency since that time. And the coming October will be the 3-year anniversary of my daughter being taken into hospital in an emergency because of her seizures. And that is the reason why the British government need to change their ways about the about what they have done with these guidelines. I was invited over to the House of Commons. Was it now 2 years ago, I believe, to tell my story about my daughter. I thought that would help. You know, Callie Blackwell attended that meeting, as did Hannah Deacon and a number of other people. And we hoped that our stories would help. But the restriction that is being put on it is totally, it's unreasonable, and it's without merit to restrict access to this medication to patients, because in my experience of dealing with medication, it is the safest form of medication that I have ever encountered.
No side effects. You know, the thing is, the reason I mentioned conspiracy theory is because when we talk about lobbying by major corporations, whether it's gun lobbying, whether it's tobacco lobbying, the fact is the pharmaceutical lobby is very powerful. It is. And it lobbies very hard against the legalisation of medicinal cannabis, or at least it lobbies hard against it being made widely available, because it does everything you said that it does. Now, some of my listeners might say, well, how do you know, Richie? Well, I've been speaking to many guests like yourself over the years, many men and women, credible men and women who've used it to treat a variety of different ailments and symptoms. And it comes down, I've had Rick Simpson on as well. I've had people like Ghislaine Langto on the programme, who wrote The Medical Mafia, an amazing doctor based in Canada. And she talks about the lobbying. They lobby very hard against it because it's going to hit them in the pocket very hard. Simple as that.
Of course they do, because they have a considerable problem on their hands, which is that medical cannabis works so well and so effectively that it removed one. Let's just talk about what I know. One child, 4 months, between 4 and 5 months of every year, in a bed inside the Cork University Hospital of every year of her life, introduced medical cannabis. She has not been admitted in an emergency since. Her pharmaceutical medication was carefully, and over a period of time, it was removed because it wasn't necessary anymore. There is a significant loss of income to the pharmaceutical companies. But what I would say is that for any parents out there that are fighting for this, it may be difficult. There may be obstacles put in your way. But the thing is, we have right on our side. We have in this, with this issue, dealing with medical cannabis, we have the best possible option, and it's worth fighting for. And I can say to you, with my hand on my heart, that the only side effects that my little girl has experienced with medical cannabis are positive side effects. They are better sleep, better appetite, putting on weight, able to express herself more clearly, at the beginning of being able to speak again, enjoying playing with her two sisters and her brother. These are the kind of things that were difficult and impossible for her previously, but now things have changed. So I think, yes, of course, the pharmaceutical companies are going to be lobbying, because they know that they're fighting a product which will inevitably win, because the more of us that know about it and the more of us that lose our fear surrounding it, once you lose the fear, then you will be able to engage with the research that's been done regarding medical cannabis clearly and make an informed decision for yourself.
It's an outrage, really. This keeps coming back to me over the years. Every time I don't meet people like you every day. I meant that when I said it earlier. Hannah Deacon was on the programme with me a year or so ago, and I don't meet people like you with your fortitude and your determination. I don't, Vera. It's an outrage to me that any man or woman in any office, in any country, can tell you that you can't, let alone that you can't buy a plant that has such a remarkable and positive effect on your child, but that you can't grow it yourself in a couple of potted plants and you can't use it. It's an absolute outrage, but we've dealt with the reasons for it. Politicians are beholden to these corporations. They are massive. They are multi-billion pound a year corporations. A very close friend of mine is an accountant who works for a company that deals with these corporations. Their bottom line is phenomenal. They are legion. But I believe people like you are starting to get through to people. And whether or not you get through to them, you're getting through to ordinary people like me. And people are listening to this, and they are listening to other programmes, and they think, wow, my child is not well at the moment. I'm going to have a go at this. And I think, and you said that's one of the reasons why you wrote For Ava, and I have no doubt that is the reason why you wrote it. For Ava, by Mercier Press, published by Mercier Press, is a vital book, folks. Get online. I'm going to put out links to where you can buy it. Buy this book and read it.
It's on the Amazon.co.uk have it at the moment if people over there are interested. And I would...
Oh, they are interested.
I just say that, you never think it's going to happen to you, or you never think that it's going to happen to somebody that you love. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it can, and it does. And what I would say is that I look at my little girl, and Ava's 9 now, and she's doing wonderful, and she's the biggest blessing that we could ever have.
Yeah.
But I look at her, and I wish that there had been more progress surrounding medical cannabis before she was diagnosed. And I hope that people like Karen, Hannah, Kelly, Tanine, me as well, that I hope that by standing up and talking about this, that there'll be some little child that isn't even born yet, that maybe they'll have Dravet Syndrome, but that they won't have to put up with the years and years of seizures and suffering that our little girl had to put up with. Because if the cannabis was introduced earlier, the seizures would have stopped. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's why you try, because it could save some other little child in the future. And for the people with the chronic pain, at the moment or into the future, it can happen to anybody. And it is something that is necessary for our local and national communities to be able to access safely and properly, because it's so effective, and it has to be allowed. And even if it's difficult for us to argue for its merits at the moment, eventually there will be enough people aware, and there will be enough people prescribed this medication, that the corporations are going to lose their hold, and we, the ordinary people, are going to take control of this situation and take control of the medication that we want prescribed for ourselves and for our children.
Here's the question. Here's the question for you. That's brilliant. Here's the question for you now. It's not unfair, this, but I'm going to ask it. What about civil disobedience? I mean, might it come to the stage where people need to just, turn their backs on these people? I'm not talking about anarchy now. But, but surely there comes a time when enough people get together and say, look, no, enough of this now. We know it works. We know it's right. So we're just going to do it. And to hell with my local authorities or whatever. I'm going to do it.
Well, I suppose, I'd be a very reasonable kind of a woman, kind of I think across the board, fairly law-abiding kind of person.
Yeah.
But when I suppose our walk was a form of civil disobedience, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And look what that achieved. I don't know whether there'll be. I never know how many people know about the walk that we did, but basically, the communication with the Health Minister Simon Harris and the Department of Health, they stopped answering our emails, they stopped answering our phone calls. When we rang, they even hung up on us, which was, so disrespectful.
Yeah.
Ava was very sick. She had a lot of seizures one day, and it was on my mind. It was on my mind that I said, like, if Simon wouldn't come to me, as in wouldn't meet me or speak to me, then I'd go to him. And she was so unwell that I decided I'd walk out the door and I'd walk to Dublin. Now, Richie, I would have walked to Dublin on my own. I don't think I would have achieved, I don't know what I would have achieved by walking to Dublin on my own, but I didn't get 4 or 5 miles of that road to Dublin. And the next thing, there was people coming up to me with flasks of tea, coming down from the next village, coming to walk with me. You're going to Dublin, I'm going to come with you. And there was thousands of people. It doesn't matter what they said on RT or they said there was a couple of hundred people.
No, there were
around.
thousands.
Well,
I saw the pictures. I saw the photographs. I saw the videos. Thousands, yeah.
And that form, I suppose that was a form of civil disobedience, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I shouldn't have been walking out on the roads like that, but we did it. We had no licence or no approval from the Gardaí, even though the Gardaí didn't give us any problem. The majority of the guards are very supportive of medical cannabis, actually. But that brought Ava's story it brought Ava's story into the hearts of thousands of people, and that began to change things here in Ireland, I believe. So when we do join together, it can make a difference, because I think that walk made a difference. And it wasn't because I was walking, it was because there was hundreds and hundreds of people walking. And even people that weren't were active on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, calling media or calling newspapers or television stations, whatever. And that made a change. So, I mean, if something is necessary, it's necessary, and that's it.
Full stop. Listen, I don't need to wish you well with the book. I think the book, it's obviously doing really well back home, and topping the bestsellers.
That, tis in the bestsellers list since it was launched. So
fantastic.
it must be. We're very happy with that, of course. But there might be people over there in the United Kingdom that are struggling, and we were struggling for such a long time, and I'd hope that if they read the book, it might give them, the hope is very important, and I hope it might give them some bit of relief or help in some way. That
I think it's more than hope. I think the book is an instruction manual as much as it is a wonderful human interest story, which it obviously is, and it's your personal story. And we love to read these stories because they're inspirational, but it's also very, very useful what you've done, and it needs all the publicity that it can get over here in the UK and beyond. There's no two ways about that. Amazon.co.uk for Ava is the story, this remarkable story of this remarkable young woman who's in school today And she has challenges ahead, of course. Vera outlined those earlier on, but what an amazing transformation. From being at death's door, being in a coma for 8 weeks, all the horrible times, having to spend time in the Netherlands, broke, wondering whether they're going to be bankrupt, Vera and her family, and they managed to come out the other end of it. And there's a long way to go for people in Ireland and in the UK who need this medicinal cannabis. And we're glad that we have you, Vera Twomey. There's no two ways about that. For Ava is the book. Get on to amazon.co.uk and buy a copy of it. I'm proud of you, to be honest. I really am. You've done an amazing thing.
You.
No, I am. And I'm going to give you the final word on it today before we move on. I'm thrilled that you came back on the programme today. I'm delighted to hear the good news about Ava. And I think you're going to do great things going forward. I think you and others in eventually breaking through the dam. I think you've chipped away at the dam. And I think you've knocked a good few chunks out of it. I think you're going to do it, Vera. So I'll give you the final word on it. And I'm just chuffed to bits that you came back today. Final word to you. And thanks for your time today.
Well, jeepers, thank you very much. I suppose I just want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak on your programme and just let people know or remind people about Ava's story. And of course, I would be grateful for people to purchase the book and buy the book. But on the other hand, I do think that the story could help people. I really do. And that's why I wrote the book. And I think if you read the book and hear Ava's story and hear what we've been through, if you're on the fence about medical cannabis, come off the fence and come over to the side which supports the legalisation and proper ability for patients to access medical cannabis safely and effectively in Ireland, England, Scotland and Wales. We need it, and we need the more people that support and the more people that come out and speak about it. If you're somebody out there that's using medical cannabis and that it has changed your life, I know there are so many people out there that are nodding their heads now while I'm saying this, that it has changed their lives. I would say to you to come out and say it publicly and tell people that you're using medical cannabis. Tell somebody like Richie that you're using medical cannabis and what it's done for your life and how it saved or changed your life. Because the more of us that come out and speak about how it has changed our lives, the sooner that we're going to access it for everybody. And I think it's like pushing the stone up the hill, you know. The more people who have their hands on the stone, pushing it up the hill, the sooner the stone will get to the top of that hill. So that's what I hope.
No doubt, Vera. And you're on Twitter. If you look for Vera Twomey on Twitter, there's only one Vera. It's at Vera S1, at Vera Sierra 1. That's all one word. Follow Vera on Twitter. Spread the tweets around. Retweet her. Go to amazon.com or amazon.co.uk. Order a copy of For Ava, this amazing story. You haven't heard a quarter of the story here today. It's a great story. And thank God she's doing so well. And more power to you and your family, your husband, your other children as well, Vera. Great stuff. I know you'll be back on in the near future, updating us as you have news. You'll always be welcome on. Thanks for your time again today. And look after yourself. Thanks very much indeed. Not at all. The amazing Vera Twomey live on the Richie Allen Show. Go to amazon.com, amazon.co.uk. The book is For Ava. And read it. And then give it to the person next to you to read. And then get somebody else to buy a copy. This is vital information. It really is. Great lady, great family. And I'm so thrilled. And I know you are thrilled that seizures are few and far between now for young Ava. She's off to school today. She has challenges ahead of her, but imagine she was at death's door, 8 weeks in a coma. This is important stuff, this. It works, this medicinal cannabis, this oil. It bloody works. Not just for seizures, not just for epilepsy, but for so many things. And it has no side effects. And that's one of the reasons why they're so slow to move on this here in the UK and in Ireland as well. It's because of the lobbying efforts of the big pharmaceutical companies in the world. People should have this if they need it. More power to Vera Twomey and the other women and men like her who campaign tirelessly to raise awareness of this amazing thing that is a plant that's been around since we've been on planet Earth. You know? Great stuff. Right, thanks for all the comments on that. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. I appreciate them. You are with the Richie Allen Show live on richieallen.co.uk, Fab Radio 2 in Manchester, triggerwarning.tv and multiple other platforms. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is addressing the media outside Downing Street.
We are utterly determined to strengthen our position by getting ready to come out, regardless, come what may. But if there's one thing that can hold us back in these talks, it is the sense in Brussels that MPs may find some way to cancel the referendum, or that tomorrow MPs will vote with Jeremy Corbyn for yet another pointless delay. I don't think they will. I hope that they won't. But if they do, they will plainly chop the legs out from under the UK position and make any further negotiation absolutely impossible. And so I say, to show our friends in Brussels that we are united in our purpose, MPs should vote with the government against Corbyn's pointless delay. I want everybody to know there are no circumstances in which I will ask Brussels to delay. We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts. We will not accept any attempt to go back on our promises or scrub that referendum. And armed and fortified with that conviction, I believe we will get a deal at that crucial summit in October, a deal that Parliament will certainly be able to scrutinise. And in the meantime, let's let our negotiators get on with their work without that sword of Damocles over their necks and without an election. Without an election. I don't want an election. You don't want an election. Let's get on with the people's agenda. Fighting crime, improving the NHS, boosting schools, cutting the cost of living, unlocking talent and opportunity across the entire United Kingdom with infrastructure, education and technology. It is a massive agenda. Let's come together and get it done, and let's get Brexit done by October the 31st. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister. He's been meeting with his own party MPs all afternoon. Took the feed from the BBC there. I'm sure they won't mind. And he said he doesn't want an election. He's coming out on the 31st no matter what. There's still time for a deal. He's encouraged by progress. He doesn't want to allow Jeremy Corbyn and Remain supporting MPs in opposition to take control of the business of the House and delay Brexit further. He didn't say an awful lot there. I don't want a general election, he said. I don't know if that's true, but that's what he said. Interesting times. In a couple of minutes' time, we'll be off to London to speak with Professor Alan Sked, Emeritus Professor at the London School of Economics and one of the founders of the UK Independence Party. So we'll get Alan on in a couple of minutes' time. Before that, though, we need a tune so we can process some of that. Thanks again to Vera Twomey. What an extraordinary woman. As I said, Amazon.com, For Vera is the book. That story, you'll read nothing like it. Check it out. And share that information with other people. So it's 13 and a half minutes past the hour. This is the second hour of the Richie Allen Show live on Fab Radio 2, triggerwarning.tv, TuneIn Radio and multiple other platforms. Alan Sked joins me. We'll talk a bit of Brexit with him. Busy old Monday show, September 2nd, 2019. Lovely stuff. And your comments on Twitter, please. Music from Dire Straits on the Richie Allen Show. Extraordinary times these, and a very interesting statement just made, as you heard there on the programme, by the Prime Minister Boris Johnson addressing the assembled media outside 10 Downing Street. These are crazy times. To help us understand what's going on, let's welcome back to the programme an old friend of ours. He is Professor Emeritus of International History at the London School of Economics. He founded the UK Independence Party. He's been a candidate himself, and he is a regular guest on national television in the UK, where he analyses or provides analysis of this issue and other issues as well. Thanks to Alan Sked for coming back on the programme. Alan, thanks for coming on. Hope you're well.
My pleasure.
Thanks for doing it. Did you see the statement made by the Prime Minister a short time ago?
Yes, I listened to it. It's just finished, yes.
And what did you make of it? He said he doesn't want a general election. He said progress is being made, although he still faces this attempt that we expect will happen tomorrow or Wednesday, an attempt by opposition MPs and maybe some rebels in the Conservative Party to take control of the business of the House. Give us your analysis. What's going on, Alan? Are these truly extraordinary times?
They are extraordinary times, no doubt about that. I think ideally he would prefer not to have an election. He wants the election sometime, but I don't think he wants it before the 31st of October. But he's going to get a big challenge tomorrow from MPs who are going to break all conventions with the help of the Speaker and try and seize control of the order paper and pass the first stage of legislation, a bill to force Boris to ask for an extension to the date that we're supposed to exit the EU. He said in his speech tonight that no way was he going to do that. So that means that if Parliament actually gets its act together and before it's prorogued actually passes a bill, then either the implication seems to be that Boris will call a general election, or there's the other possibility that he will just ignore the bill. He could advise the Queen not to give consent to it or assent to it, in which case it would be dead. The Commons doesn't have the power to act as a government. It's a legislative branch, not the executive branch. So it doesn't normally have the power to propose laws and make laws itself. But if the Speaker allows it to do this and it gets a bill passed in the Commons and the Lords, then, of course, either the government could just ignore it or the Queen could be asked to refuse. There's two ways of doing it, consent or assent, in which case it would be a dead letter. This would lead to, no doubt, a further constitutional crisis. After that, if they wanted to get there, where MPs would have to initiate a vote of no confidence. If they initiate a vote of no confidence, then under the 5-year Parliament Act, if Boris is defeated, there's a 14-day period in which MPs can elect an alternative Prime Minister. But, that would have to be Jeremy Corbyn, and they don't want to do that. So if they can't elect an alternative Prime Minister by the end of the 14 days, then Boris could ask the Queen to dissolve Parliament at a time of his choosing, which we assume would be after the 31st of October. And so there would be an election in that case, during which we would leave the European Union, which again would cause apoplexy among Remainers.
Tomorrow is going to be very interesting, not least because the Speaker of the House, John Bercow, who is a Conservative MP, but he isn't, of course, at the moment. He's allegedly neutral. He has obviously nailed his colours to the mast, to use that well-worn cliche. He's an arch Remainer. He's going to do all that he can tomorrow and Wednesday to facilitate the opposition parties to bring some vote together on preventing no deal, isn't he? Is that what you think will happen?
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think for his pains, he will be duly rewarded at the general election with a Conservative candidate running against him in his constituency. Normally, the major parties give the Speaker a clear run, but The story is that this time, because Bercow has not been a neutral speaker, the Tories will actually run a candidate against him, in which case he's very likely to lose his seat and therefore won't be speaker after the election, thank God. I hope that happens, but we'll have to wait and see. There are lots of rumours of bloodshed. I mean, the Tory whips are saying that any Tory MP, however distinguished, votes against the government on this legislation that Bercow is facilitating will lose the party whip and will not be an official candidate at any future general election. I hope that's true. I think the Tory party does need to purge itself. It can't go on having this tail wag the dog. The vast majority of Conservative MPs and party members want Brexit done and over with, and the small minority of fanatical Remainers around Gallagher and Hammond and Justin Greening and others, really they can't be afford. The party can't afford to keep them.
But they can do a lot of damage, Alan. Sorry to interrupt. They can do a lot of damage in the meantime, can't they?
I think the idea that this should be purged is probably a sensible one.
But in the meantime, they can do an enormous amount of damage, because I know Philip Hammond wrote to Boris Johnson today expressing dismay that his group of MPs didn't get a chance to meet with Johnson. Now, presumably they did get to meet with him this afternoon along with everybody else, but I wouldn't imagine the threat of being deselected is going to stop these people. If Bercow facilitates some vote on taking no deal off the table, it's likely to win with the support of these rebel MPs.
I think 2 or 3 of them are probably going to retire at the election anyway, so they don't really care. But it depends how many there are. I mean, quite a lot of them will see future cabinet careers go down the river. So I mean, they'll have to think twice. But that's politics. If they make such a big deal about it, then the crunch is coming. And what they never had is a prime minister and a team in Number 10 as determined as we have now in order to get Brexit through. May would do anything in order to keep people on board and lie through her teeth and make promises to one not and contradict them with promises to another. But Boris is straightforward. It's all down the line. We want Brexit. We must be out come what may. And if you're going to ally yourself with Corbyn in order to stop it, then bye-bye.
I don't trust Boris Johnson, I'll tell you why. Because he voted for the withdrawal agreement at the third time of asking. I don't trust him. And I know Nigel Farage deep down. Well, I don't know. I've interviewed Farage in the past, but I don't know the man. I know you know him. I believe Farage isn't convinced that Johnson is going to deliver a clean Brexit. I'll tell you why briefly, and then you come back in, Alan. Johnson said this afternoon he's still confident that progress can be made and that a deliverable deal can be done. By deliverable, one that can get the support of the House of Commons. But Michel Barnier and the European Union have been pretty clear in saying that the Northern Ireland backstop, the dreaded backstop, which is a nonsense dreamed up by Remainers, there's no need for it, you and I both know this, but the European Union are saying no, the backstop stays no matter what. So I don't understand what sort of deal Johnson thinks he can do when the EU says, listen, the backstop is non-negotiable. What do you think?
Well, there are a number of questions about Boris. The main one that worries Brexiteers is that there's a suggestion that if he got rid of the backstop, he might support May's deal, which, is dreadful for all sorts of other reasons as well. My own feeling is that he's been given rhetorical concessions by Macron and Merkel. They're just saying, all right, go away and see what you can do in 30 days, knowing full well that the European Union isn't prepared to make any concessions. So he's using this as a means of seducing MPs into supporting him until it's too late, saying that there is a chance of a deal, however slim, and everyone knows it's remarkably slim, and he probably knows as well. But another interpretation of what Boris is all about is that he's simply stringing everybody along, both in Parliament and in Brussels, just to reach the 31st of October somehow or other, and then we're out. That, you know, he's putting up smoke screens to everybody saying, yes, there's a chance of a deal, and yes, it's really only the backstop, and yes, you know, there are ways forward that you can support me on, and just support me, and then suddenly it becomes clear that it's no deal. So he might be singing to or speaking to a number of different galleries at the same time, and you know, trying to not hoodwink them all, but keep them all on board until we get to the 31st of October. And by that stage, there's no deal, and it doesn't matter all that much. But he's got to still be there by the 31st of October, or at least be in a general election during which Brexit happens. So there's, you know, he's playing his cards extraordinarily close. He has to play his cards close to his chest in order to keep a number of different parts of the Tory party happy until he gets over these hurdles. And a lot will change tomorrow. I mean, if it becomes clear that he can't stop these Tory MPs from voting against him, then I don't know, he'll become more ruthless. Dominic Cummings will certainly be very ruthless. They'll all be slung out. And, you know, Burkhoff, all the candidates stood against them. And, you know, either there'll be a quick general election, which I really don't think he wants. I think he wants a general election only if the end result comes after Brexit.
He doesn't have the time, Alan. He doesn't have the time.
I think that there won't be he'll just ignore the bill or get the Queen not to assent to it.
Which is dubious. I mean, the idea of the Queen not assenting to the will of the House is a dubious fantasy at best, isn't it?
When Tam Dalyell had a bill passed by the House moving against the declaration of war on Iraq, Tony Blair had the Queen refuse consent.
You're absolutely right. And that's an event that should have sprung immediately to mind. You're right, there is a precedent for it.
Oh, there's a precedent.
There's a precedent for it, yeah. Professor Alan Sked is our guest. We've got Alan for another few minutes. Professor Emeritus, International History, London School of Economics, founded UKIP, a notable speaker on national television here in the UK on these matters. We have Remainer listeners, and their opinions are as valid as ours. And they say, right, Richie, you rant on about the need to deliver the result of the referendum in 2016, but let's stop playing games. Even if you are right, and even if your guests are right about the need to leave the European Union for sovereignty reasons and for trading reasons and all the rest of it, we are going to suffer because the European Union can impose punitive measures on this country. What about Dover? What about the borders? What if France is told to make life extraordinarily difficult? It could have adverse implications for getting medicinal products into this country. It could have adverse it could present problems for us getting food into this country. And if you or Alan Sked say any different, you're telling lies because you just don't know. That's what my Remainer listeners will be saying. We're bound to have a big problem if we leave, because the European Union can do to us whatever it likes. Even though it sells more to us, it can say to hell with it, we'll take the pain in the short term. We will punish the UK in the next few weeks. What do you say to that?
Well, I think it's highly unlikely because they sell so much to us that they don't want confusion at the ports because of their export trade. In any case, the head of the French Customs Union for the Channel ports has said there won't be any problem, that everything's ready to go. And Dover is only the 9th biggest port in Britain. And the biggest one is Grimsby and Immingham, and they say they're ready, to deal with no deal. There'll be no problem at all. So I think this is all part. I mean, I'm not a prophet, but going by the scares that were let loose when the referendum vote took place, and we were told that there'd be 800,000 unemployed, the economy would sink by 5%, house prices would go through the floor, and all sorts of other things. And what's happened is that we have record employment. the lowest unemployment since record began, and we've got massive foreign investment, and our economy since the referendum has done better than the European one. So
let me counter that, Alan. Alan, let me counter that, because while I share your opinion of the European Union and the need for every country in Europe to leave it, I totally agree with you. But let me present a bit of balance here. You mentioned the lies told before the referendum. Some of my listeners will say massive lies were told about money being made available for the NHS after Brexit, number one. And you mentioned record employment there. Some of my listeners will say a lot of these job figures, these so-called positive job figures, are boosted by a lot of worthless jobs. Now, I'm not a snob, zero hours contract jobs and stuff.
The number of zero contract jobs is falling, and most of the new jobs being created are not temporary jobs, they're permanent jobs. Wages are going up higher than inflation for the first time in decades. And, given that in Europe itself, unemployment is twice on average the unemployment of Britain, something must be going right for us compared to Europe. After all, there's a debate about these hundreds of thousands of young Europeans coming to Britain. If Europe was such a wonderful place and Britain such a terrible one, logically it would be hundreds of thousands of young Brits who would be trying to get to Europe. But because unemployment in Europe is so high, we have hundreds and thousands of young French, Italians, Greeks, Spaniards trying to come here. And the job market is actually absorbing them, despite these hundreds of thousands of young Europeans who can't find jobs in their own countries coming here. They are finding jobs in Britain. We have record employment.
Let me put another question to you while we have you. Professor Alan Sked is our guest. Jeremy Corbyn makes a very good point, doesn't he, when he says that if we come out of the European Union with a Brexit, with a no-deal Brexit, whatever, it opens up the country to the United States of America and a trade deal where you'll have big pharmaceutical companies and healthcare providers in the US rubbing their hands with glee as they come in to try and pick off bits of our National Health Service. Now, I've got no truck with Corbyn, with any of them, to be honest with you, but I don't think Corbyn is beating down the wrong track there. I think he's got a very good point. We've got to worry about that.
Well, no, we don't, because Trump and Boris agreed at the G7 meeting that the NHS was off the table. And
do you believe them? Do you believe Boris Johnson?
Why would we agree to it? I mean, we've got huge opportunities in the trade deal with America. I mean, Canada and Mexico have got free trade deals with America, and the exports to America have surged. I mean, we do relatively small amounts of trade with America, although we have a surplus. But there's every reason to expect that we would have huge advantages from a trade deal. Obviously, the Americans are going to suggest various things, but we're a free country. We just say no. And the government's made it perfectly clear time and time again that the NHS was off the table, and the Americans, as far as I know, have accepted that.
Well, my listeners will say, some of them will say, I don't believe Boris Johnson, and I don't believe Donald Trump, and I don't believe the men and women who work with them. They will say everything of any value in this country has been sold off, and sold off on the cheap. Why should we believe the mealy-mouthed words of Boris Johnson and Donald Trump? Obviously, the NHS is going to be on the table. They just won't believe it, my listeners.
Well, the thing is, the people who are buying things are partly Americans. They're the Chinese, Japanese, people from Europe, people from all over the world, and people from the Arab world. And the idea that the Americans are buying everything up is a fantasy. The man who's telling lies isn't Boris, but Jeremy Corbyn. I don't believe a word the man says. I mean, he would ruin the country overnight. I mean, if you think Brexit's a threat, the idea of Corbyn coming in would see the pound collapse and capital flows of unrecognised dimensions, money leaving the country, and there'd be capital controls put on by Labour. Corbyn is the biggest threat to the economy for decades, not Brexit.
Yeah, it might surprise you to hear me call myself a socialist. I am. I'm an old socialist. Corbyn is a social democrat. When it comes to
Corbyn's not a social democrat. He's a Marxist-Leninist.
Well, I would say so. Look, I'm not going to argue with you about semantics, right? But my point about Corbyn being, I don't like reading things in the Sunday press when John McDonnell talks about coming after people who've bought second homes to let them out, to provide themselves some money in the retirement years. I don't like that sort of stuff. That's not socialism. That's crazy. And on that point, I'd agree with you. Alan, final question for you. Thanks.
But they call themselves Marxist-Leninists. It's not as if I'm denying.
No. Listen, they do, but I don't believe they are. Whatever they say they are, I don't believe they are. Social democracy, for me, is beyond the pale.
I think you're being naive there.
Okay, fair. I'll give you that, right? But I'm going to ask you a final question. I don't believe we'll ever come out of the European Union. I believe there are very, very powerful forces that would never allow that happen because of what the European project is ultimately meant to be. Closer and closer convergence of, fiscal alignment, military alignment. Very powerful forces going to stop it. I don't believe we're ever going to leave properly. What say you, Alan? Final question to you. Do you think
I
we can get out?
Will, and I think the European Union will cease to exist within the next 10 years.
You're that sure of it, that we will leave properly and the European Union will collapse?
The next world recession, which is around the corner, will destroy the Eurozone and probably the European Union.
Well, if we're still around in 10 years' time, my friend, you and I'll be on the old dog and bone down to London to say, listen, you were right, Mr. Sked, Professor Sked. Thanks for your time, Alan. I know there's a lot of requests for you to do these interviews. Fascinating couple of days ahead, no doubt about it. Love chatting with you.
Fascinating for 2 months ahead.
No doubt about it. Thanks for your time today. Cheers, mate. Bye for now.
No, thank you. Bye.
Bye for now. That's Professor Alan Sked, Emeritus Professor of International History at the London School of Economics, the man who founded UKIP there. Tells me I'm naive when I say social democrat and not Marxist-Leninist. But anyway, semantics. It's 21 minutes to the top of the hour, 21 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. Have I got time for a tune? I think I've got time for a tune. When I come back, I'll read some of your comments. We'll see what else is going on because there are developments all the time. This is going to be a big few days ahead. A big few days for the destruction of Brexit because it's never going to happen. That's my opinion. Whatever Alan says. It's my opinion it's never going to happen. So a big few days ahead. Let me just drag out a tune there. What have I got? Oh yeah, I've got, what have I got? Do you know what I've got now? And I just dug this out at random and it is completely appropriate. Completely appropriate. This is Genesis on the Richie Allen Show. And a tune called Land of Confusion. Couldn't be more appropriate. Random tune. Genesis, Land of Confusion on the Richie Allen Show. So this is where we are with this Brexit nonsense now. And how it's being destroyed. Tomorrow, opposition parties led by Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party are going to use the Speaker, John Bercow, to get some time, to schedule some time, basically to present a vote on stopping Boris Johnson taking the United Kingdom out of the European Union with no deal. That's their play, seemingly, and it's going to happen tomorrow or Wednesday. It'll be frantic in the next couple of days. There are about 20 Conservative members of Parliament, Johnson's colleagues in the government, on the government benches, whom are staunch Remainers and who may very well support opposition parties' efforts to take no deal off the table and out of Boris Johnson's hands. He met with his own party today. We were told that meeting was going to be about the possibility of a general election. That Johnson was going to tell the party today, we were told, that if the opposition party with the rebels succeed tomorrow in taking no deal out of Johnson's hands, that he would then try and get a vote for a general election. That's what we were told anyway. Johnson spoke outside 10 Downing Street a short time ago. I brought you the very tail end of that statement. We can hear it in full now. It isn't that long, but it is interesting, so we'll hear it. Here he is.
5 weeks ago, I spoke to you from these steps and said that this government was not going to hang around and that we would not wait until Brexit Day, October the 31st, to deliver on the priorities of the British people. And so I'm proud to say that on Wednesday, Chancellor Sajid Javid is going to set out the most ambitious spending round for more than a decade. I said I wanted to make your streets safer, and that is why we are recruiting another 20,000 police officers. I said I wanted to improve your hospital and reduce waiting times at your GP, and so we are doing 20 new hospital upgrades in addition to the 34 billion more going into the NHS. And I said I wanted every child in this country to have a superb education. That's why I announced last week that we are levelling up funding across the country and spending much more next year in both primary and secondary schools. And it's to push forward this agenda on these and many other fronts that we need a Queen's speech in October, while leaving due time to debate Brexit and other matters. And as we come to that Brexit deadline, I am encouraged by the progress we are making. In the last few weeks, the chances of a deal have been rising, I believe, for three reasons. They can see that we want a deal. They can see that we have a clear vision for our future relationship with the EU, something that has not always perhaps been the case. And they can see that we are utterly determined to strengthen our position by getting ready to come out, regardless, come what may. But if there's one thing that can hold us back in these talks, it is the sense in Brussels that MPs may find some way to cancel the referendum, or that tomorrow MPs will vote with Jeremy Corbyn for yet another pointless delay. I don't think they will. I hope that they won't. But if they do, they will plainly chop the legs out from under the UK position and make any further negotiation absolutely impossible. And so I say, to show our friends in Brussels that we are united in our purpose, MPs should vote with the government against Corbyn's pointless delay. I want everybody to know there are no circumstances in which I will ask Brussels to delay. We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts. We will not accept any attempt to go back on our promises or scrub that referendum. And armed and fortified with that conviction, I believe we will get a deal at that crucial summit in October, a deal that Parliament will certainly be able to scrutinise. And in the meantime, let's let our negotiators get on with their work without that sword of Damocles over their necks and without an election. Without an election. I don't want an election. You don't want an election. Let's get on with the people's agenda. Fighting crime, improving the NHS, boosting schools, cutting the cost of living, unlocking talent and opportunity across the entire United Kingdom with infrastructure, education and technology. It is a massive agenda. Let's come together and get it done, and let's get Brexit done by October the 31st. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Boris Johnson, that was a short time ago there, saying that MPs shouldn't block Brexit. In this statement, he said they would chop the legs out from the UK position in the negotiation if they backed a delay. Because that's what's on the agenda tomorrow, Wednesday. The opposition parties and rebel MPs looking at taking no deal out of his hands and looking at putting a vote forward to delay leaving again for the fourth time, and not to leave on October 31st and not to leave till some other date in the future. These are very interesting times indeed. Thanks for your tweets, by the way. On the buying a second house, and I had this out with Alan Sked, John Parsons, who's in Salford, whom I know, has tweeted me, Richie, I'm a modest income joiner. I bought a second house about 15 years ago. I've always charged rent well below the market. I've been cheated out of rent and I've had the house wrecked, but I hung on to it to help in retirement and help my boys. John McDonnell can shag off, says John Parsons. And this is very interesting because it emerged over the weekend that the Labour Party have been looking at middle income earning people who've got or bought at some stage a second house, but who've bought it for the sole purpose of letting it out to earn an income from it. And McDonnell was fairly forthcoming. There was no ambiguity about what he said, that in a government, the Labour Party would look at that very closely because of the difficulty, because of the shortage of housing, and because of the grave difficulty that young people have in getting on the housing ladder, because it's very difficult for young people to get a mortgage and to get a house, that he'd look at maybe stopping buy-to-let or maybe taking houses from people. This is what he said, I'm not making it up. Maybe compulsory purchases even from people who have second houses that they don't live in. This is the sort of thing you see. And as I ranted, and I did rant a bit yesterday on Sunday View talking about this, when this was reported yesterday, every third word of every article mentioned socialist. It's not a socialist thing to do, to punish people for doing well. That's a myth. It's pure mythology. It didn't happen in Venezuela. It didn't happen in Chile under, respectively, under Chavez or Allende. It didn't happen. That's not what happens in a socialist government, in a socialist society. They don't go punishing people and taking stuff from them. Oh yeah, you've done well, so we're going to take all your money and give it to this guy over here. It doesn't work like that. But if Alan Sked wants to call it Marxism, I want to call it social democracy, that's a completely different thing. And you would have to imagine, all things being fair, and of course things are not fair. We don't live in a democracy, full stop anyway. Doesn't matter who's in. It matters not who's in at any given time. It doesn't. You're screwed one way or the other. It's just the method of screwing you differs from party to party, right? That's how it works, right? But there's never been a socialist government in this country. There's never been a socialist government in Ireland. There's never been a socialist government in Europe, to my knowledge. Maybe in Spain at one time or another. Right, we're coming to the end of the programme, rapidly coming to the end of it. I've got Jill Henderson joining me tomorrow live from the Ozarks. I can't wait to speak with Jill again. She's been on the programme in the past. Jill Henderson will be on. And Mark Collett joins me tomorrow to sift through the fallout from tomorrow's Brexit madness. Mark Collett joins the programme. The conservative writer and commentator Mark Collett joins the show tomorrow, so it promises to be pretty busy. And I've got loads of other guests lined up for the rest of the week, but I've not got the diary here to hand to tell you about those. So I'm going out with Bruce Springsteen. This is The Boss, a song called This Life. That closes out the programme. Huge thanks to Vera Twomey. Go to amazon.co.uk and buy for Ava. Do that. And thanks to Alan Sked as well. See you tomorrow. Bye now.